Hello, students. Today we are going to start with the chapter A Visit to Cambridge. The author of this chapter is Firdaus Kanga. Let me give you a brief summary of the chapter. In this chapter, the writer could move only on a wheelchair and he accepted his disability as a warrior. He made journey all over the world and he proved his ability is the greatest among normal people. And not only this, he went to Cambridge and met Mr. Stephen Hawking and interviewed him. And as you all know, Mr. Stephen Hawking, who's a great scientist, was completely, totally paralyzed, although he wrote a great book. He thought that disabled people should not be worried about their condition and should always think positive. If those people get attention towards their ability, then they can get easily their goal. So this chapter motivates the disabled people and also the normal people. Let's read the chapter line by line by the words of Firdaus Kanga, as he is the author, and he has briefly described his visit as well as how he interviewed Stephen Hawking. Cambridge was my metaphor for England, and it was strange that when I left it had become altogether something else because I had met Stephen Hawking there. So in these lines, the author is talking about one of his favorite place, that is England and the Cambridge, and there he met Stephen Hawking. It was on a walking tour through Cambridge that the guide mentioned Stephen Hawking. Poor man who is quite disabled now, though he is a worthy successor to Isaac Newton, whose chair he has at the university. So the guide is, you can say, that is sympathizing with the great scientist Stephen Hawking, as it is written in the direct speech, that how he addressed him as a poor man. And I started because I had quite forgotten that this most brilliant and completely paralyzed astrophysicist, the author of A Brief History of Time, one of the biggest bestsellers, ever lived there. When the walking tour was done, I rushed to a phone booth and, almost tearing the cord so it could reach me outside, phoned Stephen Hawking's house. There was his assistant on the line, and I told him I had come in a wheelchair from India. Perhaps he thought I had propelled myself all the way to write about my travels in Britain. I had to see Professor Hawking. Even 10 minutes would do. Half an hour, he said, from 3:30 to 4. So students, you can, as you can read, that Firdaus Kanga approached the secretary of Stephen Hawking and asked for 10 minutes, as he wanted to meet Stephen Hawking and wanted to take interview of him. But as luck would have it, the secretary gave him 30 minutes, that is half an hour. And what was the time? It was 3:30 to 4. And suddenly I felt weak all over. Growing up disabled, you get fed up with people asking you to be brave, as if you have a courage account on which you are too lazy to draw a check. The only thing that makes you stronger is seeing somebody like you achieving something huge. Then you know how much is possible and you reach out further than you ever thought you could. So in this paragraph, the poet is talking about his disability and is saying that one becomes, at certain point of time, one becomes started feeling weak, when people keeps on sympathizing with them. So seeing other people with the same condition gives them courage. So that is also one of the reasons that why he wanted to meet Stephen Hawking, because he also used to be on wheelchair, and the author Firdaus Kanga was also on wheelchair. I haven't been brave, said his disembodied computer voice the next afternoon. I have had no choice. So, from this line, we can conclude that finally he has reached the place and he is now sitting in front of the great physicist, that is Stephen Hawking. Surely, I wanted to say living creatively with the reality of his disintegrating body was a choice, but I kept quiet because I felt guilty every time I spoke to him, forcing him to respond. There he was, tapping at the little switch in his hand, trying to find the words on his computer with the only bit of movement left to him. His long, pale fingers. Every so often, his eyes would shut in frustrated exhaustion, and sitting opposite him, I could feel his anguish. The mind, buoyant with thoughts that came out in frozen phrases and sentences, stiff as corpses. So, in this paragraph, the author has described the condition of Stephen Hawking, how his body was. It was almost disintegrating, and as you all know, he was not able to speak. He used to use the computer to respond. He used to type, and a voice used to come out as his reply. And Firdos Kanga, the author, he is saying that he was able to feel his pain, his anguish, and he with what he has compared, he's compared that he came out in frozen phrases. He has compared the sentences as stiff as corpses. Corpses are the dead bodies, they become stiff after the death, the body. So he's saying that he was also, you can say that, being sympathizing with Stephen Hawking. A lot of people seem to think that disabled people are chronically unhappy. I said, I know that's not true myself. Are you often laughing inside? About 3 minutes later, he responded, I find it amusing when people patronize me. And do you find it annoying when someone like me comes and disturbs you in your work? So, here the author asked the great scientist that, do you feel annoyed? Do you feel angry when someone wants, like him, wants to interview or just wants to meet him and disturbs him in his work? The answer flashed. We can make out that he's not able to speak. So answer, the flash, it flashed on the screen. Yes. So he was very truthful. He said that he admitted that he used to feel angry. Then he smiled his one way smile, and I knew, without being sentimental or silly, that I was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. So, this particular smile of Stephen Hawking's, that one way smile, that is, when he used to put his one cheek up, and that particular smile was appearing so beautiful to the author that he admitted that he was looking at one of the most beautiful men in the world. Though he was on wheelchair, he was not able to move, he was not even able to speak, but even then the author found him the most beautiful person in the world. A first glimpse of him is shocking because he's like a still photograph, as if all those pictures of him in magazines and newspapers have turned three-dimensional. So you can make out his condition with these lines, that as you look at him, you feel that he is like a photograph. A photograph is, it does not move. It is there whenever you look at it. It remains there unless and until you move it. So he was there as a still photograph because he was not able to move, he was not able to walk, he was not even able to move his head. So it was very pitiful. And the author is saying that, all those pictures, because he has seen his pictures in the magazines and newspapers, and he is comparing that, it was appearing as if all those pictures have turned three-dimensional. Then you see the head twisted sideways into a slump, the torso shrunk inside the pale blue shirt, the wasted legs. You look at his eyes, which can speak, still and they are saying something huge and urgent. It is hard to tell what, but you are shaken because you have seen something you never thought could be seen. So here the author is very understandable. He is able to, feel his pain, and he is able to read his emotions in the eyes, as he's saying that his eyes appeared as if they can speak, and as if the eyes were trying to say something very important, something very huge or urgent, but he was not sure what was that. But he was able to understand his feelings. Before you, like a lantern whose walls are worn so thin you glimpse only the light inside, is the incandescence of a man, the body almost irrelevant, exists only like a case made of shadows. So that I, no believer in eternal souls, know that this is what each of us is, everything else an accessory. What do you think is the best thing about being disabled? I had asked him earlier. So, one question that the author asked him is that, do you think is there anything best about being disabled? So the reply came, I don't think there is anything good about being disabled. He was very truthful. I think I said, you do discover how much kindness there is in the world. Yes, he said. So Firdaus Kanga said that if one is disabled, you tend to discover that other people who are normal are full of kindness. And Stephen Hawking agreed on that. He said, yes, it was a disadvantage of his voice synthesizer that it could convey no inflection, no shades or tone, and I could not tell how enthusiastically he agreed with me. So the author was successful in convincing him that the one advantage of being disabled that he also felt was that they can feel that there is kindness in the world. People are kind. He was convinced. Every time I shifted in my chair or turned my wrist to watch the time, I wanted to make every one of our 30 minutes count. I felt a huge relief and exhilaration in the possibilities of my body. How little it mattered then that I would never walk or even stand. So the author was, trying to make each second or each minute important of those 30 minutes, which he got, to meet the great scientist. I told him how he had been an inspiration beyond glitch for me and surely for others. Did the thought help him? So that was, one thing that the author was doing, that he was trying to make him feel that people all over the world admire him and appreciate him. And he has been an inspiration to so many people. Now the reply came as, no, he said, and I thought how foolish I was to ask. When your body is a claustrophobic room and the walls are growing narrower day by day, it doesn't do much good to know that there are people outside smiling with admiration to see you breathing still. Is there any advice you can give disabled people? Something that might help make life better? So the next question that the author asked is that any advice that you want to give to the disabled people. So the advice that came was they should concentrate on what they are good at. I think things like the disabled Olympics are a waste of time. And again, he put his point of view that things like disabled Olympics was just a waste of time, and they should all those disabled people should concentrate on what they are good at. Only they can be successful. I know what you mean. I remember the years I had spent trying to play a Spanish guitar considerably larger than I was, and how gleefully I had unstringed it one night. The half hour was up. I think I have annoyed you enough, I said, grinning. Thank you for. And so those 30 minutes were up, and Firdaus Kanga just moved. He stood up. thanking him that I have annoyed you, because as he said that, when people come to meet him, he gets annoyed. So he was just thanking him. And then suddenly Stephen Hawking said, "Stay." I waited. "Have some tea. I can show you the garden." So he was the privileged one who got extra time, and Stephen Hawking personally asked him to stay and offered him tea and wanted to show him his garden. So they moved towards the garden. The garden was as big as a park, but Stephen Hawking covered every inch, rumbling along in his motorized wheelchair while I dodged to keep out of the way. We couldn't talk very much. The sun made him silent, the letters on his screen disappearing in the glare. So there also they moved, though it was very huge, but Stephen Hawking covered every inch on his wheelchair, and though uh, the author wanted to talk a lot, but he couldn't because in the sunshine the screen got glared and he was not able to see. An hour later, we were ready to leave. I didn't know what to do. I could not kiss him or cry. I touched his shoulder and wheeled out into the summer evening. I looked back and I knew he was waving, though he wasn't. Watching him, an embodiment of my bravest self, the one I was moving towards, the one I had believed in for so many years alone, I knew that my journey was over for now. So, though he was given half an hour time, but he spent another 1 hour chatting, you can say, with him, or seeing his garden and having tea. And when that time was past, he was just left, and he wanted to kiss him, he wanted to cry, but he couldn't do that. He just touched his shoulder, and he himself, as he was on wheelchair, he himself wheeled out into the summer evening. It was summertime, and he looked back, and he felt that Stephen Hawking was waving at him, though he wasn't, and as he was not able to do also. But he felt in his heart that Stephen Hawking was waving at him or saying goodbye to him. So, watching him, as he thought that he was one of his, the bravest soul that he has met. And he felt gratitude towards him, and he just moved on with life, waving him goodbye. So, this was the story, the meeting between two disabled people, one Firdaus Kanga, the author, and this excerpt has been taken from Heaven on Wheels. And the other person is Stephen Hawking, who is no more with us, and he was a great physicist and one of the greatest scientists of the century.